All right, what's happening, everyone? Corey here with the Long Island Lacrosse Journal. We have Brooke O'Brien, who's the head women's lacrosse coach at Washington and Leon, with us. All right, Coach, how we doing over there?
Doing great. How are you?
Good, thank you. Doing good. It's a pleasure to have you on. I think it's a really nice opportunity for us to talk to a super successful coach. At the Division III level, I think it's a hidden gem of a division. There's certain conferences I feel like people don't even know about just yet, and certain schools that people don't even know about. I think the experience is kind of something that is always worth sharing and talking about as well, because I think there's definitely some misconceptions, and I think there's misinformation in around that, which we'll touch on. But before we maybe talk a little bit about your program and your division as a whole, if we can just go back a little bit and just talk about your upbringing, growing up as an athlete, and just talk about your playing career too.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Longmeadow, Massachusetts, a small town outside of Springfield, Mass, in Western Massachusetts. And I played a million sports growing up. Soccer was my big sport. Also loved to play basketball. I was not very talented. I loved to rebound and set picks for other people. And actually did not pick up lacrosse, funny enough, until ninth grade when I went to Lewis Chafee in Connecticut. Which is sort of crazy growing up in Longmeadow, because they did have and still do have a very strong youth lacrosse program. But I was always so busy playing other sports, I just never really picked it up.
Sure.
And then when I went to Loomis, they were looking for a goalie for their lacrosse program because they had graduated some. And I was, at the time, as a ninth grader, had been the varsity goalie for the soccer team.
Mm-hmm.
And so a coach of mine, Chuck Vernon, everyone affectionately knows as Bruno at Loomis, said, we're going to turn you into a lacrosse goalie. And so he spent much of our spring break when I was a ninth grader throwing lacrosse balls at me and teaching me, I obviously already knew things about angles and things like that from soccer, which was, I think, part of the reason he wanted to make the transition. But I really have to credit him for bringing me to lacrosse and, really setting me on the path where I find myself today.
Was it difficult going from like protecting a goal that's just so much bigger to being like, all right, you can't move that much here. You got to just kind of like, hang tight.
It was. I think those of you or those people who have seen me play lacrosse goalie would say that I didn't really adhere to that. I was a bit more of an active goalie than was typical in the 90s and early 2000s.
Well, you probably would have been great in today's day and age too.
Maybe, but partly, I think because of the soccer background, I didn't want to just be in the crease. I think I wanted to be involved in more than that. Sometimes to my detriment, but it was, it was fun. And clearly, lacrosse has brought me so many great things. So many of my best friends, obviously professionally great things, and just really fulfilling experiences.
What was your recruiting process like, being a multi-sport athlete and then getting looked at by and eventually going to Amherst?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's, my recruiting process was definitely before the modern world of lacrosse recruiting. Again, even in high school, I think my primary sport was still soccer. That was where I was focused. I was also playing some AU basketball at the time, but really only played lacrosse during the 3 or 4 month season every spring that we had at Loomis, and was recruited to Amherst as a soccer player, knowing that I was going to maybe try to walk on the basketball team and maybe play lacrosse as well, but wasn't totally set on that. When I got to Amherst, I just had such a tremendous experience with the program there and with Chris and Carol and all the coaches there, that it just made me love lacrosse that much more. It clearly made an impact on me and where I am now.
Well, it's super unique that I just learned. I knew you were a big-time soccer goalie, but you also played hoops and lacrosse in Amherst, so a 3-sport athlete. What did you just learn from that overall experience playing 3 sports at a super competitive, like high academic college?
Yeah, clearly it gave me those time management skills that, in many ways were cultivated in high school, but just learned how to balance everything, how to be busy. I'm someone who enjoys being busy. You can imagine this social distancing thing is a little bizarre in so many ways. But I think it's maybe the first time since I was like 10 years old, I haven't been going a million different places at once. I think being a three-sport athlete, I think has really helped my coaching because in a lot of ways, I sat in the shoes or stood in the shoes of almost everybody on my team, right? So in soccer, I came into the college program and right away was a starting player and had to perform as a first year in a high pressure position in a strong program. In basketball, I was very much a walk-on, very much one of the last players off the bench, and just loved to play the game and loved to be at practice every day and loved to compete. But there were times where I thought maybe I should be playing over this person, or maybe I, deserve more playing time. But I've had that experience, and I'm not sure that many coaches have. A lot of coaches tend to be the people who are the superstars or the great players, or that's why they go into coaching. So I think in a lot of ways, I really value the perspective I have from being a walk-on the basketball team at Amherst, because I think it helps me get into the psyches of some of the players on my team who don't see as much playing time. And then the last piece is the lacrosse piece, where I very much was a backup for a couple of years. And then, as I continued to progress and get better, suddenly I was the person kind of, in the hot seat in that, again, high pressure position. So yeah, I mean, I've kind of, through my college experience, clearly a long time ago at this point, I have kind of stood in many of the shoes of the people on my team. And I draw on that, how does it feel in this, or, how can the coach make it feel a little bit better when you have to, deliver maybe a message they don't want to hear, but how do you deliver it in a way that is fair and is respectful and is honest? And so I think that having been in that many situations is helpful. I think I've also experienced all different kinds of coaches. I think about all the sports I've played from youth to college, and every coach is different in terms of what they do and what they value and what they bring. And, as I think about my own coaching philosophy, I've drawn on the things that I think have been really helpful and maybe left behind things that, or avoided things that I felt like weren't helpful. So it's been a good part of my coaching education as well.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And also the fact that you had all those experiences at the college level, right? Like maybe a player experienced that at the high school level where they're, at a really big time, like you said, like a Loomis, and every team's really good and maybe you have a different role depending on the team. But to experience at the college level, it's like, wow, it's really relatable and really impressive. Now, do you feel as though that like you could have gotten that same experience at, let's say, like a Harvard or like a Division I school, or do you think like the conference that you were in, the school you were at, was very conducive for having that like three-sport experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think Division III lends itself to the multi-sport athlete more so than a Division I experience. I mean, it depends on what area you're talking. I think, back in the day, there were multiple multi-sport athletes, even at the Division I level. But I think as you get into the 2000s and moving forward, for a variety of reasons, some of which have to do with the demands on college athletes, some of which have to do with, the specialization at the youth level. But for a variety of reasons, that's just become not as common. Obviously, there are still a few great athletes who do it today, whether it's, field hockey lacrosse players or soccer lacrosse players. But it's definitely, the exception, not the rule at this point.
At what point did you realize like, hey, I want to be a college lacrosse coach?
Well, it was like the beginning of my senior year. I think I had done an internship in finance the previous summer, and at that point, I was waiting to get what I thought would be my offer from that firm. And I was kind of toying with the idea at Amherst. They also have a program called the Hitchcock Fellow, which is a student athlete stays to be an assistant coach. I was toying with applying for that. And it was really kind of this, path diverging in two different directions. Do I want to go into coaching, or do I want to go into finance? And when I got my offer, I kind of had to decide that. And I decided to go into finance. And I worked at Goldman Sachs for 2 years in their healthcare investment banking division. I did a year in the New York office, and I did a year in their London office as well. But when it was time to sign my 3rd-year contract, I just couldn't do it. I kind of knew at that point that I really wanted to get into coaching and kind of get back to, I think, where my heart was in terms of athletics, and really get back into a business that was people focused. And again, I really enjoyed my time at Goldman. It's not any way negative pronouncement on them. It's just, I knew I wanted to be much more in a people-focused business rather than a kind of numbers-focused business.
Sure. And once you made that decision, like, hey, I need to get into this. I think this is where my life is kind of leading. What was next steps for you? Or I guess what was the first step for you to say, like, hey, this is how I'm going to get into coaching?
Yeah, so I had, again, I'd kind of been thinking about this for a couple of years. And so I had a little bit of a plan. I ended up applying to and going to Smith College into their master's program for exercise and sports studies, which essentially is a 2-year program for people who want to coach college athletics, particularly for women. And so I joined that program. I left Goldman in, I believe it was like July of that year, and then joined that program in late August, early September. And I was a graduate assistant soccer coach at Smith, and then taking classes. And then I was lucky enough that they also let me work with the lacrosse program at Amherst. So I was able to coach with Chris Paradis, my previous head coach when I was a student, and having, again, those dual experiences of just taking in different coaching styles and philosophies, and getting used to kind of being on the other side of it, if you will, as a coach rather than as a student athlete.
And then what eventually led you to Washington and Lee?
Well, my program ended. It was a 2-year program. So spring of 2005, I believe it was, spring of 2007. I was looking for a job. I was looking for a head coaching position because the 2-year program at Smith had finished. I'd graduated with my master's, and I was just, looking for a job. And I was lucky enough that there were a couple high-profile Division III jobs open at that time, and I'd applied for a few of them, not knowing if I would, even get a look. Clearly, I only had 2 years of assistant coaching experience at the time, and was lucky enough to work through the process at Washington and Lee and be offered the position. Kind of a small world piece. My father had gone to law school at WNL, so I had kind of known about WNL through that experience. But when I had looked at schools myself, clearly I had decided to stay closer to home. But I had always remembered what a beautiful campus it was, and what a cute town it was. And it was one of those things that, was just, I don't know, things aligned in a strange way.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you bring that up about your father, because I feel like a lot of just student athletes, or even people looking at colleges from Long Island, Washington Lee is still kind of a hidden gem, because like you can't just go like a half hour and visit it. Like there's tons of schools in our area. So I think anyone that kind of knows about the school, if they're not getting recruited by them, it's like they got to talk to a friend of a friend, or an aunt, or a dad. It's kind of a similar story, which is cool. How does the school in general just kind of, I guess, market themselves or get the word out, just in your experience, and to the world, let alone Long Island?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, I think we're one of those kind of, as you said, hidden gems. I think the people who know about Washington and Lee appreciate it, and speak incredibly highly of it. And the campus is beautiful, the town is great, the education is second to none. But I do think you go further away from campus or to areas where there aren't a lot of alumni, and people have no idea who we are or what we are. So we're working on that, and we're working on making a name for ourselves nationally and internationally, because it is truly an incredible education. I think one of the things that separates WNL from other smaller art schools is that we do have pre-professional programs as well. So in addition to incredible liberal arts and sciences like most people have, we also have business majors, accounting majors, communications majors, engineering majors, and journalism majors. So, typically you're only going to find that type of offering at a larger university where you'd be in classes with, hundreds of students, and we still have, an average class size of 16 students while still having that breadth of academic offering. So we like to think it's kind of the best of both worlds of small classes, but a really broad academic curriculum.
Is that academic kind of like diversity in terms of your offerings and what students can take reflected in your roster? Or would you say that like most of the girls in your team kind of stick to one lane?
No, it's definitely reflected in our roster. I think, we've got, quite a few women in the sciences, whether it's neuroscience or psychology or biology, some of them on pre-med or pre-PA school tracks. We've also got a good number of women in I would call it kind of the econ business finance area, where they're looking into some, postgraduate plan somewhere in either finance or consulting or some area like that. And then we've got women who, honestly, I've been here 13 years, and we've probably had someone major in every major at this point, whether it's studio art or classics or politics or romance languages or, environmental studies. I mean, there's probably someone who's done it. A lot of times, many of our students will double major or they'll major in minor. So I think by this point, we can probably check off most of the majors at this point.
Cool. No, that's great. It's very unique, especially compared to some of the higher academic, smaller Division III schools that are out there. It's like you don't get those engineering type degrees at a lot of those places or
Right.
things along those lines. Now, you get the job at Washington and Lee. You take over. I believe this would have been like your 13th or 14th season. Is that right?
Just finishing finished with my 13th season.
12 and a half.
Yeah, sort of a weird year. Yeah.
Yeah, weird year. Asterisk on that one. But you take over the program, 13 seasons ago or so, and there's immediate impact. How are you able to just come into, with so many variables and unknowns and players that you didn't even recruit really, and just be successful as a team?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was very lucky to be able to come in and take over a program that already was very well established. So the only previous head coach before me was Jan Hathorn, who left coaching after 19 years at WNL to become the athletic director, and she has been the athletic director here at WNL for the last 13 years. So she left the program in a great position. It wasn't about, there really wasn't a lot to fix. It was, there were great student athletes in the program. It was just time for her to move to that next opportunity. That clearly was a great opportunity for her as well. And so that I was thankful for, because, usually you get your first job and you're really having to pay your dues, and I was able to kind of jump in right away. And yeah, I mean, we had a pretty successful first season. Part of that being just how talented the team was. We had, in my first season, the senior class was loaded with really strong athletes, 2 of whom were National Player of the Year in their positions. And we had some big wins. That year, what I think about is the disappointing ending of all teams. We lost to Amherst in the round of, I think it was the round of 16 or the round of 8, I forget. But it was definitely a good first year. But then we graduated a lot of talent, and then I feel like I definitely paid my dues the next 2 years trying to really build the program.
That's great. And then just in terms of like consistency, so from there on out, for the most part, you guys have been at the top of your conference, winning conference championships. 2017, I think, marked one of your best seasons. A goal away from being in a national championship. So you're right there in terms of just being one of the best teams nationally. How have you been able to keep such consistency going year after year within the program?
So I think it's a couple of different things. One, I think it's the recruiting piece. Clearly we're starting to find the women who really can compete at the highest level of Division III nationally. And they're tremendous athletes. They're committed to the game. They're great students who are committed to their academics as well. But they have a drive about them, and they have a focus, and they come to WNL to compete for a national championship. That's what they're thinking when they arrive as first years. And it's taken us a while to get to that point where those are the student athletes that we're recruiting. I think the other piece of it is definitely the cultural piece, right? You're building that belief, and you're building the processes, right, that will get us to that end goal. And so I'd say really in the last 6 to 7 years, that focus on the process and that focus on the cultural piece has really just brought tremendous dividends to our program, not only in terms of what everyone can see in terms of the win-loss record and national semifinals and whatnot, but also in terms of just the feel of the program and people's commitment to the program. And when people graduate, my hope is they graduate with a tremendous education, with an incredible lacrosse experience, and also feeling like they've had a chance to be a normal college student in many ways. You can't do everything, but you can still be involved in some other things on campus. And for many of them, as they graduate, lacrosse is one of the most important things they've done.
Amazing. One way I always like to leave this, Coach O'Brien, is just a general piece of advice for a lacrosse recruit who's kind of going through this currently, and it's definitely uncertain in weird times, but maybe just like a positive way that they can kind of handle this situation and get through it as a recruit.
Yeah, I mean, I think for everybody right now, including us as coaches, it's about, let's take a deep breath, right? Clearly there's a routine and a cycle to how things have been done, maybe the last couple of years or even the last year or two. But clearly, you know, we're living in a different world right now. We're living in a place where everything is a little bit different. And, you know, let's all hope that the thing that's most different in our lives is the lacrosse recruiting schedule. You know, I think we're all very privileged if that's what we could say. But I would just say, you know, with the schools that you're most interested in, you know, have the conversations. I'm assuming, you know, assuming they're 21s and they can communicate with their coaches. You know, communicate about what the process is going to be, because every school is a little bit different, right? You know, some schools are changing academic requirements. Some schools are moving to a later process. Some schools are going to be on the similar process of what they were doing before. And I think it's just a matter of having those communication lines open so that people can understand what the parameters are. I think that's where people get nervous, is if they're not sure what the parameters are anymore. But I think if we can all communicate clearly, then you know, we'll know, while it may have changed or shifted, we'll all kind of know what the new parameters are, and we'll work through it accordingly.
Awesome. And in terms of just staying connected with your team, how's that process going for you guys? You starting to adjust to it a little bit, or is it still tough?
Yeah, you know, it's been just over 6 weeks since kind of everything changed so quickly. You know, the first few weeks, really, it was just a matter of finding ways to be together once everyone was home and off campus and safely with their families, finding ways to connect, finding ways to kind of grieve together. You know, we had been putting together another year that was possibly going to be the strongest in our history. And so to lose that was really hard, not only because clearly just seeing everybody every day is hard, but I think we will always look back and say, what if the season had happened, what would have happened? And so I think that's been hard, particularly as you can think for our seniors who, you know, like high school seniors and college seniors everywhere, have just lost a lot this spring in terms of expectations of senior spring and graduations and everything. So I think, you know, I think we're all kind of working through that process at different paces. I don't think it's singular for everyone on our team, but we're working through that. The students just finished their winter term classes and exams. Spring term starts Wednesday. So we have kind of 1 4-week term left, and then it will truly be summer. But it's, you know, clearly been bizarre. And our focus this spring has just been communicating with our student athletes. We have a team Zoom at least once a week. We have, we've been doing a lot of individual meetings with student athletes, just checking in on them and their families individually. But just finding ways to connect, because, you know, on a normal day, we would spend 2+ hours with them every day. And so it's just been so strange for 6 weeks to feel this vacuum of connection that we're, you know, clearly every day trying to overcome.
Yeah, it sure is weird just to find ways to connect. And also, when you do connect, it's like, what's worth talking about? What do people want to talk about? And it's like, you want to be conscious of that too. So it's not just you giving information that they're not ready to hear or want to hear, etc. So that's great. Well, listen, Coach, we really appreciate your time. It's amazing what you're doing and have done with the program. Wish you nothing but the best of luck. And, you know, we look forward to promoting kind of your story and your program to the Long Island Lacrosse Journal.
Great. I appreciate your time. I hope you and your family stay safe.
Thanks, Brooke. You too.